Okay, so great. So I just click that, got it. Very good. So a very big welcome to everyone this evening, especially from people from different parts of the world. And we have different parts of the world represented here this evening, which is great. And of course, we have some old friends, people we work with either in All Hallows or in Milltown Institute or wherever. And good to see all our old friends as well, like Mark Noonan and Joe McCann from those All Hallows days, and Una from Milltown Institute, and so many of our graduates as well, and current students, and also Concept I see there from Presentation Sisters, and Frank is here from Jesuits in New York, and we have so many people from so many places. Anyway, everyone, needless to say, is most welcome, and especially, of course, to our author this evening, who was making it possible, the whole event, Sister Dr. Eibhlis NicUaithuas, and then, of course, Paul from Seattle, who's going to give the launch, and that will be responded to by Eddie Cosgrove. And then Eibhlis herself as the author will speak, and we'll have hopefully a little time for questions and answers, which Bernadette will chair. So in case anyone here doesn't know me, then that's very possible. I wouldn't know everybody and everyone wouldn't know me. I'm Michael O'Sullivan, and I'm the director of Spire, the Spirituality Institute for Research and Education, which is hosting this event. Spire exists really to promote the study of spirituality in Ireland and beyond. And this book launch this evening, being a book to do with spirituality studies, is very much in keeping with our reasons for being in existence and trying to do what we do. So we're very happy to be associated with the book launch this evening for Eibhlis. And Eibhlis, of course, is also a member of our spiritual directors panel in the MA in Applied Spirituality program. And this year too became a module leader of one of the modules. So we have a lot of association too, specifically with Eibhlis herself. Okay, so I thought I'd like to just show the Spirituality Institute website, just to let you see it. We'll go quickly through it. But before I do it, because I certainly don't want to forget to say this either, we are very grateful, Spire, Spirituality Institute Research and Education is very grateful to the All Hallows Trust, who are providing a few scholarships for some of our students, for a few of our students to do MA studies in applied spirituality. So we're very grateful for that. And I want to thank the All Hallows Trust this evening for that support. Okay, so then just to show the screen, let's share the screen with you about the Spirituality Institute website. Here we go. This is the Institute website, and you can see the address there. You get it very easily, https, etc., spiritualityinstitute.ie. And over here, then, the pictures at the top really kind of signify the different sort of themes that we are about in the Institute. This one over on the left is leadership. Here we have ecology. Here we have pilgrimage. Here we have spiritual care. And over in the right corner, we have social concern. So these are some of our themes, if you like, that we focus on in the Institute for research and study and so on. And a little bit there, as you can see, about Spire, how it came to be and all that kind of thing. And then some of our events are highlighted here underneath. The MA and PhD studies we're engaged with. Then we have the launch this evening. We had Frank earlier on Gerard Manley Hopkins, and we have public lecture I gave in Southeast Technological University last week on spirituality in the university on the occasion of the Southeast Technological University coming into being. And with that, then, of course, spirituality studies are now in a university in Ireland, applied spirituality studies in particular at PhD and MA level. And there is a research unit in spirituality studies there too. And we also now have a research fellow, Kerry, who's here this evening from Boston, who will be working with Bernadette in particular, and myself, I suppose, as well, on the production of a book to do with contemplative methods for the study of spirituality. It'll be a handbook, and it'll make a good contribution to the field. And then I have 2 scholarships for unique MA in spirituality, and this I mentioned earlier about how we're being helped by the All Hallows Trust to fund a few scholarships, 2 this year, 2 next year. Okay, and then about us, you get to see the team, the trustees, where we consist of a board of trustees. And here we are, myself, Bernadette, Anne-Marie Dixon, and Ruth Harris. Ruth was the external examiner for a number of years for the MA in Applied Spirituality. It's now the Southeast Technological University, and she herself is a lecturer in and TUD as it is now, Technological University of Dublin. And of course, she did the MA herself in Applied Spirituality back in about 2007, if I remember correctly, 6, 7 maybe. So then that's the trustees, but the governance also consists of an advisory committee, and we have governance reports. We have to produce a report every year as a charity for the charities regulator. And so that keeps us on our toes to make sure that we deliver on that. And I'm just trying to show that there's also a advisory committee, but it's jumping on me, not to worry, move on. Then events, we have our events listed underneath here. You'd see all the different events we've had over the last number of years since we came into being. Then there's the MA, of course, which Noelia Molina took over from me as the program leader for that MA last August. And so now she's leading it. And of course, she herself is a graduate of, well, she did the HDIP part of the program back in Middletown Institute days. My dad did a PhD then in field of spirituality studies after that. And of course, she brings other expertise to the leadership role. Her background as a lab scientist, and she's also a practicing psychotherapist. And then research then is another area, of course, that we work at. And we have a number of PhD students at the moment. Diane Jackson, who's a graduate of the MA. Liz Murray, who's a graduate of the MA and was here this evening, has just returned from the Camino, which is related to her PhD work. And Tara Travers, who's a graduate of the MA. So they have come with that MA background into PhD studies in spirituality, and it's great to see that progression taking place. Then, of course, the resources, our biggest resource, I suppose, is the library, the Spirituality Institute Library. And that has thousands of excellent books in applied spirituality. It's a specialist spirituality library in this country and maybe beyond it. Bernadette works with Kathleen Ling to really keep that library going so well as it is. And we spent a lot of money to have to keep that book, all those books up to date and so on. Infrastructure too that's needed to keep a library going. But anyway, that library is going very well and gets great response from the students. We have various videos then, of course, as well, which you can go and hear podcasts and videos, which are resources too for the study of spirituality available through the website to you if you were interested. And you can see there what's available, and you can see is there anything there that interests you with the videos. Then you have the podcasts, and you can look at those as you wish in your own time. And then public lectures. We've had various public lectures. The most recent one was with Frank and Jared Manley Hopkins, a spiritual practice, reading Jared Manley Hopkins, a spiritual practice. And then we have links to all kinds of other organizations. We're linked with organizations around the world who are all engaged in the study of spirituality. You can see this there. And then there's a contact form if you wish to be on the newsletter that we might send out at times. When there are events coming up, we kind of send out what I might call a MailChimp to people, so you can become part of that if you're interested. We haven't started the donate button yet, but it's up there, and at some stage we hope to activate it. So if you know of anybody who has money and wanting to support a good cause, you could draw their attention to that. Thanks very much. Okay, well, anyway, that's a little bit there about our work, because we are hosting this event this evening, and it just gives you a bit more background on where we're coming from and why this event to us this evening is such a suitable event really for us to be involved with, because it is a serious academic study that Eibhlis has done of spirituality and marginalisation in the Vincentian tradition. And we're now looking forward to hearing more about the book and about how people who have read it, our launcher and our responder, what they have to say to us about it. And I'll now move on therefore and stop my sharing and stop share and come back to you. Okay, so Paul Blankenship is going to be the launcher this evening. And Paul is in Seattle, University in Seattle. And that's 8 hours, I think, behind us at the moment. So they still haven't reached the afternoon yet. But it's great to have Paul here. We're really delighted, Paul. Great to have you. And Paul's presence here this evening links us with the International Society for the Study of Christian Spirituality, which is the largest society of its kind in the world. And Bernadette and myself have certain leadership in it and still do. And Paul is now also in leadership in it, and Noelia has now come into leadership in that society as well. So we're making a good contribution. Paul is also, he was in earlier life, we might say, a social worker. So he came into the academy really from that kind of background, which is a great mix now to have somebody with that background in the academy. And he's, he's engaged in ministry still with people who are in situations of disadvantage. So he brings a unique kind of experience and background and expertise to this evening's proceedings, as somebody who has kind of lived in the situation, I suppose, that is also the subject of study in the book. And so he'll speak from that kind of background to us. So Paul, I think that's okay. I know you're finishing a spiritual accompaniment qualification as well at the moment, so that's fair play to you. You've got a great rounded background there. So without any more ado, therefore, let me call for Paul Blankenship to launch this very important book on spirituality and marginalisation in the Vincentian tradition, authored by Sister Dr. NicUaithuas, Daughters of Charity.
Oh, hello, everyone. Hello, and so nice to be with you. Thank you for the invitation to be a part of this institute and to help launch this fantastic and invaluable book. It is a true delight for me to be a part of the good work that you are doing in the world and for the world and with the world. And I am honored truly as well to meet each of you. In every Zoom screen, we are all, as you know, sacred, unfolding, needed, and creative love mysteries, sparks of the divine who create a good fire when we gather together. And my remarks tonight, and yes, it is not quite afternoon here in Seattle, will move in 4 movements. First, the beauty of our presence, then the affective affliction of marginalization, what glows about Eibhlis's work for me and the good differences I think it makes in the world, and finally, questions to wander on the journey with. But to begin with beauty. In her 1999 book on beauty and being just, Harvard professor Elaine Scarry writes, "The willingness to place oneself in the path of beauty is the basic impulse underlying education." For Scarry, beauty is a power found in a place that can empower our sometimes wobbly but always necessary steps toward justice. And in her most recent book, Beguiled by Beauty, a title derived from the work of Pseudo-Dionysius, who claimed that God is beguiled, lured by our beauty, theologian and spirituality scholar Wendy Farley challenges us to expand our understanding of beauty and develop contemplative practices that help us apprentice under beauty's gentle, compassionate, and transformative leadership. In Let Us Dream, The Path to a Better Future, Pope Francis writes that beauty, like creation itself, is a pure gift, a sign of the God who overflows with love for us, and that beauty is itself like a spiritual companion that can help us decenter our limited selves, dream big into the divine dream, and come together to birth a more loving future. And it seems to me that Eibhlis's book is clearly a work of beauty that can help us dream big and birth a more loving future. And that our virtual gathering is as well a place of beauty that can help us dream big and birth a more loving future. I am a Quaker, and so I'm fond of silence. I like to imagine that my words are nurtured and then born from the womb of shared silence. So if it's okay, I'd like to invite us to enter into this womb of silence for just a few seconds, to slow down and let our spirits drink from the beauty of this work and our gathering. Now, the affective affliction of marginalization. To be human is to question. To question is to seek meaning, purpose, and connection. As Michael said in his recent talk on spirituality in the university, this is fundamental to what it means to be a spiritual creature. In Letters to a Young Poet, the Austrian Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, in what I think of as a letter of spiritual accompaniment for the future, that to be human well is to live questions that matter and love them with our patience, lest we fearfully run into a false shelter built by inadequate answers, brick by hasty brick. A question of all time, I propose, but which has become more urgent because of the complex and troubling realities of our immediate time, which sincerely questions the possibility of a livable human future on Earth, is about how to feel at home in this wondrous, beautiful, and wounded world. The sociologist Peter Berger thought that this question is what really matters about religion, and that this is what our spiritual practices are all about, really, helping each other feel at home here. To be human, then, I propose, and to be a spiritual creature, moreover, is to live a question, consciously and unconsciously, about what it means to be at home in this world. And time matters here, and culture matters here, and our histories matter here. Questions of home, though universal, have come to matter more fiercely because of our time, our cultures, and our histories. In our time, across our cultures, because of our histories, marginalization is a fierce presence in our everyday lives. It is a root of our heartbreak, our confusion, our discontent, our righteous and unrighteous anger. As Eibhlis describes in her book, marginalization is the multifaceted experience of social derision and exclusion. It may stop one from dreaming and trusting in the presence of love. Though there are a plurality of marginalizations that cannot and must not be reduced into one experience, it seems to me that there is a global shared marginalization of homelessness. And in my view, there are at least three related but distinct kinds of homelessness: material homelessness, existential homelessness, and ecological homelessness. As you know, material homelessness is the crude reality that vast numbers of people around the world do not have physical dwellings that are safe, affordable, and humanizing. Though neoliberalism has seduced some and too many Christians into thinking that the poor are to blame for their material homelessness, the anthropologist Elliot Lebo spoke God's truth, I think, when he said that people are homeless because they do not have homes, and they do not have homes because they cannot afford them. Existential homelessness is an imperfect name for what happens when your spirit does not feel at home in the world. When your spirit has become uprooted from a meaningful life and you cannot find healing wells that are good, true, and beautiful. I think existential homelessness has become more acute because of secularization, the scandals that have plagued the church, the professionalization and social mediatization of the human person, and our world's addiction to human failure, which is front page news all of the time. By nurture and not by nature, I am tempted to call existential homelessness spiritual homelessness, but I fear that might reinforce the assumption that spirituality is intrinsically interior and prevent us from developing a more social spirituality. That, as Philip Sheldrake puts it, is a way of living publicly. A third and related kind of homelessness is ecological homelessness. Ecological homelessness is a more than human kind of homelessness. It is a name for the number of animal species and ecosystems and otherwise that we have lost and that are becoming lost because of climate change, and how this more than human kind of homelessness renders us homeless as well. Ecological homelessness poses the muted question in an understandably crowded room of fear, denial, and despair about how much longer humans will be able to live on Earth. And a question returns that invites our apprenticeship. Given the interlaced marginalizations of our time, given material, existential, and ecological uprootedness that, as the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh would say, inter-are, how can we help human and non-human creatures feel at home in this world? Eibhlis, with the shepherding of this wonderful institute and the kind hospitality of the people she spent time with for her book, has given us glowing answers that will help make good differences in our world. Her book will help us dream into the future with open eyes and open hearts and in a distinctly Vincentian spirit. Before I share 5 things about Eibhlis's book that really glowed for me, and which I find especially valuable for our world, I want to root us in the 3 questions that she lived, and therefore the questions that brought us together in this beautiful gathering. It seems to me that Eibhlis lived her questions as quaestio divina, as Bernadette writes about, where research is itself a spiritual practice, where questions call out for our spiritual companionship and critical reflection. First, she asks, how is spiritual direction or accompaniment in the Vincentian tradition offered to people who are marginalized? And how is it received by people who are marginalized? Second, can a distinctive Vincentian approach to spiritual direction or accompaniment be identified? And third, if the preceding findings are affirmative, what are its characteristics? And what has this to offer the practice of spiritual direction with people who are marginalized? I think it's also important to note something about how she lived these beautiful gathering questions for the world. She established a theoretical framework by looking at the long history of spiritual direction in Western Christianity, and by focusing on its availability in practice with people who are marginalized. She conducted serious, sophisticated qualitative research with practicing spiritual directors in the Vincentian tradition and people in marginalized circumstances in Ireland who received spiritual direction from members of the Vincentian family. She also, it seems to me, and perhaps most importantly, I think, lived these research questions with the divine, who I think answers our questions with questions of friendship and love. And now let me move toward finishing my remarks by sharing 5 things about Eibhlis's work that really glowed for me and which promise to be helpful for the practice of spiritual direction in general, but with marginalized folks in particular. When I began my own ethnographic research with people who live here on the streets in Seattle, one of my teachers, Elizabeth Liebert, encouraged me to treat my research as contemplative practice and take a, quote, long, loving look at the real, as the Jesuit Walter Burghardt wrote about. This is precisely, it seems to me, what Eibhlis has done. She took a long, loving look at the real reality of spiritual direction, the Vincentian tradition, and the difference spiritual accompaniment can make in the lives of people who are marginalized. Eibhlis's long, loving look at the real, the way she brilliantly demonstrates that research can be a spiritual practice for love of the world, glows. When you read this book, it will not just fill your mind with insight, it will also, if you let it, walk your heart further into the divine mysteries. And second, what glows for me as a scholar and practicing spiritual director is how Eibhlis illuminates the Vincentian tradition and how it can and does already offer a distinctive, helpful note on the piano of spiritual direction, and for people who are marginalized in particular. What I see in this book is a needed approach to spiritual direction that is characterized by gentleness, by tenderness, by deep listening, mutuality, flexibility, and going out to meet people where they are, no matter who they are. The people I got to know in Seattle certainly yearn for these spiritual tendings. And so I can only dream with you about how much they and spiritual companions here, but around the world, would be benefited by a Vincentian informed accompaniment. My third glowing is courage. We spiritual folk like to imagine that the spiritual things we do in the world are good for others and not just ourselves. And sometimes we forget to quaestio divina and ask hard, honest questions about whether our well wishes are actually true. And then look at the real for love, unblinkingly. Eibhlis had the courage to ask tough questions of herself and her tradition and the real differences spiritual direction makes in the world. And that glows. As far as I can see, there is little empirical evidence about the difference spiritual accompaniment makes in the lives of people who are homeless. Thanks be to God that Eibhlis's work changes that. It offers us evidence that spiritual accompaniment does help people experiencing marginalization, and that perhaps it can become more helpful and life-giving if we too have the courage to keep asking courageous questions. And I could go on, and perhaps you will share what glows for you about Eibhlis and her work. I want to note one final glowing, though, in a way that I hadn't seen before and that I am deeply inspired by. Eibhlis links the practice of spiritual direction to social justice on the basis of hope. I think this is beautiful and brilliant. In my understanding, she demonstrates that the practice of spiritual direction in a Vincentian mode can cultivate a hope in people who are marginalized and often in seemingly hopeless circumstances, and that this hope is like a social power that can help people keep walking toward the tough path of a more just world. And if I may, and in conclusion, I'd like to leave you with two questions. As you probably have, I often hear people who are homeless speak about how helpful animal companions are in their lives. How, in fact, they couldn't live without their animal companions, and offer these animals the only loving presence that they can trust. The difference animal relationships make lead me to wonder, what might animals teach us about how to accompany people who are marginalized? Do animals have a spiritual history in the Vincentian tradition. Second, and finally, in the 1960s, the Berkeley anthropologist Laura Nader encouraged her flock to study up and not just down. In other words, she thought that the field of anthropology had focused too much on the marginalized and not enough on the marginalizers, and to the detriment of the marginalized. The contemporary anthropologist James Below encourages theologians and scholars of spirituality to take a similar path and study up. When I think about who needs spiritual direction or accompaniment, and Pope Francis's encouragement to prioritize the spiritual care of the poor, I think, dream about how much difference it might make to focus more on providing spiritual accompaniment to people in power who make decisions that deeply impact the poor. So should we study up as well as down, and sideways and upside down too? Thanks again for the opportunity to be in the path of beauty with you, friends.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much indeed for those beautiful words. And we will just keep going for the moment, but when we get to questions and answers, we can return to things you raised or said. So our next speaker then, who is going to respond to the book as well as what he has heard from Paul, is Eddie Cosgrove. Now, Eddie Cosgrove, he is also a graduate of the MA in Applied Spirituality at a time when it was run in Milltown Institute. He came to us as somebody who already had a PhD in engineering, if I remember correctly, Eddie. So you bring a very interesting mix there. And but since then, Eddie now is the director and men's team coordinator of the Ignatian Spirituality Project. And this is a project that works with people who are homeless and the margins. So he brings really, again, a very good mix of academic study and learning, and also experience and ministry in the field with marginalized people. So here in Ireland and in Dublin. So Eddie, we welcome you to share with us your fruits of the reading of Eidhis's book.
Thanks very much, Michael, and thanks, Paul, for your reflections there. You really felt led into a space, a spiritual and a academic space there at the same time. So thank you for that. And there's a few things I'll respond to as I share a little bit. And just just grateful that I was asked to read Eibhlis's book, which is her doctorate largely, and it was a real grace for me to read it, and it was really got me in touch with something that's very important in my own life in terms of spirituality, walking with the marginalized, and I really have been inspired by it and consoled by it and challenged by it. So I'll get on to that in a minute. So just, I suppose, when I was reflecting on what I'd share about, and one thing that I'd like to focus on that Eibhlis has picked up on is about the mutuality of spiritual accompaniment with people on the margins, and the mutuality, and also finding Christ in the other. And one of the first people I met in terms of the Ignatian Spirituality Project, which is a project for people in recovery from homelessness and addiction. So one of the first, I recruited someone for the team who was going to be a witness on our first retreat, who would share his story. His name is Michael, and I remember meeting him at the time, and he was, for me, it was an encounter with Christ. It was his authenticity, his honesty, and humility, and also his strong faith, and a faith that was out of experience in his own life and in his own story. So I remember that encounter. It's 3 or 4 years ago, but it reminded me of what Eibhlis picked up on in her doctorate, and which is very strong in the Vincentian tradition. So Michael became a witness in the Ignatian Spirituality Project. Just to say that project started in Chicago, and I was in Toronto for theology studies, and I encountered it there. And we started it in Ireland before COVID, and we're getting going again. There's a women's retreat on this weekend, so I ask your prayers for the women who are going to come on that retreat, and those who are leading it. So the book is entitled Spiritual Accompaniment and Marginalisation in the Vincentian Tradition. Like Paul, I was just amazed at many different parts of reading it. I learned a lot about Saint Vincent and Saint Louise, and the great spiritual friendship they had, and also how the Vincentian tradition emerged, and that the fruits of that are still going today all around the world. It's just amazing. There's the fire that Paul spoke about of spirits. I really got a sense of that from this book, and that was lovely for me to get that. So a few things struck me, and the first one I'll share is being evangelized by those on the margins. So it's I'm going to share my screen just for a second, or I'm going to attempt to share my screen for a second. And this is an icon that's on the front of the book, and you're probably you may well have seen it, but it's Christ and Vincent de Paul, an encounter with Vincent de Paul and a beggar. And the question here is, one question here is, who's giving to whom and who's receiving from whom? And there's a mutuality there that is two-way. And yes, Vincent de Paul is giving the beggar bread, but the beggar is also offering something to Vincent. And this strikes to the heart of Eibhlis's thesis and her book and the Vincentian tradition in terms of what I picked up, that there's an encounter there, a very, very important encounter. And I'm just going to stop the share now and say a little bit more about that. But so there's a couple of quotes here that I just like to read to you. So this is from one person that one of the people who spoke to Eibhlis in the research. To be open to being evangelized by the poor, I mean, that's our mission, speaking of the Vincentians. A lot of people can do other work with the poor, but they are not asked to allow themselves to be evangelized by them. But we believe that that's where we meet Christ and are met by Christ and are transformed in that relationship. And he goes on to say, I mean, a Jesuit might go there, but if he goes there and allows himself to be evangelized by them, he's a Vincentian. So I enjoyed that, and it reminded me of Peter McVerry saying about the time that he spent in Hardwick Street in his early days, and how that changed him, and it changed his life. And Paul also mentioned about Pope Francis, and he tells us that the poor have much to teach us. We need to let ourselves be evangelized by them. And the new evangelization is an invitation into that, into the power at work in their lives, and to put them at the center. And so the question is, well, how does spiritual accompaniment, or what does spiritual accompaniment have to How does that come into this? And Eibhlis gave a definition of spiritual direction, which he says, I have come to understand spiritual direction as an intentional relationship that enables both the director and the directee discover how God lives within the story of each of their lives and how they live within the story of God's life, and through which we lead one another more deeply into God. So you can hear the mutuality in that relationship. And of course, it's an unequal relationship, but yet there's a mutuality there. And the Vincentian approach of seeing God in the other person, and the poor being our Lord and our masters, really brings about that change. Yeah, it's really about embracing our own story as well. And the paradigm that Eibhlis has focused on for this work is story. And one person that she interviewed says it like this: I would be saying to the guys in spiritual direction, I say, not the guy next door, the holy fella, you embrace your own. Don't embrace his story. Don't envy his story. Embrace your own story with the black and white and the grays and whatever it's yours. The agenda of your own life will make you a saint. There are so many nuggets of wisdom in this book. I really enjoyed it. So I might just skip on because I to share something about the findings that Eibhlis made in her research for accompanying people on the margins, as far as I can see. And Paul alluded to many of these too. So how I would see it is there's a formal and there's a less formal approach. And Eibhlis says for many people who are marginalized, I'm paraphrasing slightly here, the less formal approach, at least initially, affords them the safe space they need to have their story heard and held in such a way that they discover God in it and come to know anew God's story and discover it in it. So that's the informal approach would be, and it would be combining body and spirit, which is key to this approach. So it might be in a hostel, it might be meeting people over food, or like the mystics of ago who met people at the window, or people meeting people informally. That's a key element in order to build a relationship to accompany people on the margins. And also go out. We need to go out to where the directee is at. It's not about waiting for the directee to come to us. It's about going out. So the directee it's about the directee being in their comfort zone and the director or the accompanier being outside their comfort zone. So that's at least initially. So that's a learning. And there's also group spiritual accompaniment as well as individual. The ISP project is more group. And it may happen more than every month. You know, and also the importance of peer ministry. So there are a few things that I picked out from the research, and they really affirmed my work in the Ignatian Spirituality Project. Mutuality, sharing meals, being vulnerable. Something I didn't mention was when accompanying people on the margins, Eibhlis recommends or discovers that if the accompanier is able to share some of their vulnerabilities, it's more important in this relationship in order to build trust, because trust is a key issue, and that's not something every person is able to do, but it's quite necessary for this kind of work, I would say, in a way that's appropriate to, at least my experience in ISP is the facilitator shares personally about themselves and their story with God, and that also came across in the research, and many other things, the formal and informal approach, and so on. Finally, or moving towards the end, how was I challenged? She questions whether bringing people away from a hostel for a retreat is the best way to spiritually accompany people on the margins. And I really appreciated this question, because really what she's asking is it not necessary to accompany people where they're at first, spiritually and corporally, before we take them away, or before we offer an experience for them? And it's a good question, and I just my answer to that is that because of COVID, we now are going into hostels to offer spiritual accompaniment in hostels, and it's also people who have come on our retreats, who have become leaders, who are leading that. So that was a kind of something that happened due to COVID, but I just see the wisdom in that. I'm not saying it's essential necessarily. Another challenge was around elitism and spiritual direction. Its availability to those on the margins, and versus meeting people where they are at, and the informal approach. So she kind of said, well, both are needed. We need training, but then we need to go out, and the Vincentian tradition has so much to teach us. So my challenge really is to Sister Eibhlis is to, I feel there's huge fruit in this, to offer the spiritual direction community guidelines for how to accompany or think about training people so that they can accompany people on the margins as part of a training program, because there's so much wisdom in that. So I'd like to recommend that you read Eibhlis's book, and just thank you again for the opportunity to share here, and I'm very consoled to be connecting with all of you this evening.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Eddie. That's great. Thank you indeed. Now, Eibhlis, yourself, as the author of this work and the reason why we're all gathered here this evening to celebrate the publication of the book and to launch it into the world, we'd now like to hear from yourself.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And Paul and Eddie, thank you for your challenging comments at times to me as well, and the questions that are there. And just to say generally, thank everybody for being here. That I suppose the book began and ended with questions. And I suppose the first of the question, the book itself came into being because of a question. And I had got back in the early noughties, shortly after it was published by Spiritual Directors International, a book called Tending the Holy, Spiritual Direction Across the Traditions. It's a book I actually loved. I really enjoyed it. But when I came to the end of it, it went through different traditions, went through Buddhism, Sufi, Muslim, Hinduism, Judaism, and came into Christianity, and of course, Ignatius, Benedict, Dominic. And I came to the end of it and I said, where is the Vincentian? And then I answered that I'll have to write the Vincentian. So it took me a while before I actually took up the challenge of it. And I suppose in time, during the course of doing it, I was frustrated in many ways, but I'm really glad that it came to fruition, because I was so convinced there was something there to start with. And I suppose the things that stand out for me, even as both Paul and Eddie spoke, the things that sort of stand out for me around it, with Eddie and Paul, your questions, about that, about the study up, and I suppose it's not a question of either or. It has to be a question of both and. And I suppose that comes very much, we constantly come back to that within the Vincentian family. It's both and, it's never an either or situation. So yes, I take that on board. The people who are actually doing the marginalising, which can include ourselves at times, yes, we need to be among the people who are being accompanied to see what we're doing. And as you spoke, Eddie, some of the things that came to me, of things that I knew were in there somewhere, is that whole notion of our spiritual accompaniment of people, particularly people on the margins, taking place within the corporal service that we give. And I suppose the one that stands out for me was where a spiritual director spoke about how she was working. She was in a school at the time for severely disabled young people. And there was a 6-year-old girl there who was not toilet trained. And she saw, who had no language either and nothing. And so she saw toilet training of that 6-year-old as spiritual direction. And I remember my own reaction when she said it first. And then she explained, it's all very fine not to be toilet trained at 6, but if you're not toilet trained at 26 or at 46, it's a completely different sort of story. And especially if you have no language to go with it and haven't got all the helps that are around. And I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. And if that becomes our benchmark, the fullness of life that Jesus came to bring us all, then everything we do can be considered spiritual accompaniment. And that is a huge challenge to all of us in how we are with one another generally. So while there's the informal bit that you were sort of highlighting, Eddie, it doesn't mean that you don't have to be sufficiently trained, that you need to know what you're doing in order to actually address the questions. And in that, I'm reminded of, it's one of the books, the current practice when I was doing the lit review at the time in this, that a dietitian who was dealing with eating disorders, and she had an innate sense that the eating disorders, there was a spiritual dimension to these eating disorders. But she was afraid to handle it because she was afraid of imposing herself and her own thinking on people. So she went and trained as a spiritual director so that she could actually address the spiritual, be able to address the spiritual within the eating disorder context. So maybe there is something in there that all of us, if we're out there doing anything, we should all be trained as spiritual directors. So on that note, I'd just like to particularly thank the spiritual directors whom I interviewed, those who acted as gatekeepers and got me people who were receiving spiritual direction that I could interview as well. It was a real privilege to sit with each one of them and listen to their stories. And I think, Paul, as you point, it was very much a contemplative exercise. The whole way through, I sat with this and I knew I was sitting in prayer with everything I was doing. I'd like to thank all who made it possible for me to get to that stage, for Bernadette as my supervisor, for my own community, my local community here in Kilmore West in Dublin, and for our provincial community, particularly for the 2 provincials who at different stages along the journey let me go ahead. So, but overall, I suppose at the end of the day, it's those who have allowed me to journey with them and in different stages of their lives that have given me the impetus to see that there was something a bit different and give me the push to do something and to explore this in the way that I have. My hope would be it can be taken further. I definitely would like to see something more being done on it. As I said towards the end of it, it's not fully international. And I would love, we are present in so many countries in the world that an international study of this nature would do something more. But more so even than that, I would like to see us all engaging in it. So just thanks to everybody, and thanks to all for being here. And I don't know, it's back over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Eibhlis. I know it's a great occasion and a great evening for us all to be here with you, to share with you in the joy of the publication of this fine book. And we wish it well as it journeys out into the world as well. And we're very grateful to yourself for all the good work you've done, because this is going to be great help to a lot of people. And we do need to know, and I'm speaking as a Jesuit now, and I can say that we do need to know more about spiritual accompaniment in the Vincentian tradition, because clearly it has so much to offer. And I've been struck really myself at the fact that it hasn't been more out in the open, more to the forefront of things. And I wondered about that. And we had a great conference in All Hallows College a couple of years ago, where we had a number of people over to speak about this and to confirm my view. God, you know, this tradition has so much to offer. Why is it not out in the world more? Why is it not more at the forefront of things? And your book is going to help that now to go forward. And that would be great, because we do need it out there, and it's going to do great good. And the Daughters of Charity are doing great work, the whole Vincentian family. And it's wonderful to know of all the good work you're doing, and that we're all given the opportunity this evening to come and be with you here now and with other members of the Vincentian family at this such joyous time. So we're going to have a little time for questions and answers. And Bernadette Flanagan, my colleague Bernadette Flanagan, whom Eibhlis, as she mentioned, supervised Eibhlis's PhD thesis. And everybody I think knows Bernadette, so I don't need to say much to introduce her. She's a you know, very, very well-known person in the field of spirituality studies and research. So it's great, Bernadette, if you I might just chair a short session for some questions and answers if people want to come in and say anything to what they've heard this evening. You're there somewhere. Great.
Congratulations, just to add my voice to everybody else's, Eibhlis, and it's a great day to have this launch, because from 9:15 to 5:15 today we were looking at spiritual care in Trinity College in the School of Nursing. That you know, it's just moving, this idea of spiritual care and each human person being on this journey that deserves accompaniment at a soul level. And how are we going to bring it into all these new settings? Your work is very timely in a global context in terms of what's happening with spiritual care, and Pope Francis' invitation to consider this more as well. So thank you so much. So comments, just words of congratulations, words of insight, words that will extend our reflection, whatever it might be. We have 10 minutes now for that. So there's a little thing there at the end of your screen called reactions. If you click on it, there's a place there where you can even raise your hand, but if not, you can just knock off your microphone and come in, and we'd be delighted to hear you.
I think that, Eibhlis, you know, I suppose an academic study, you know, is not something that everybody will rush to read, especially when it's a big book as it is. But I think sections of this book, though, perhaps could be produced, you know, maybe in somewhat altered form that would reach a wider section of people as well, you know. I know that some sections of the book would be more academic, let's say, in the sense of research methodology and so on like that. But I wonder, could a kind of a more abridged version of the text too be produced that would be aimed at, let's say, what you might say is a more popular audience, shall we say?
Yeah, I'm hoping to do that. That's my next project, if you like.
Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and even could you say anything about you were part of a spiritual direction training program in the Vincentian tradition, Eibhlis. Can you say any more about that?
That's right. The program started in Denver in Colorado. And we were hoping when All Hallows was there that All Hallows would become a centre for Vincentian spirituality, and the course would be delivered from there. We had one offering of it, so there are a number of people who were actually trained as spiritual directors in the Vincentian tradition. But then with the closure of All Hallows, and then with me taking on board the study as well, that ended up not being able to happen. So hopefully it's still taking place in Denver, but if it's at all possible, I'd like to see it getting off the ground again here.
Another project, Eibhlis, you're going to be busy.
I know.
Una has her hand up there. Una, you're welcome.
Yeah, I just want to heartily congratulate all the presenters this evening. It's been very, very inspiring, but Eibhlis in particular, I think you created a centre for us, you know, looking at spiritual direction in the Vincentian tradition. I just noticed when Eddie was talking as well, there seems to be a place in spiritual direction where the space between us goes beyond even, you know, even Vincentian, Jesuit, Franciscan, whatever, that somehow or other it goes beyond all of that. Would you have anything to say about that? Do you know what I'm asking is, it seems to transcend that particular identity, whether it's Jesuit, St. Louis, Marcy, Presentation, whatever. You know, there's a space that we create in spiritual direction that goes beyond all of that.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Una, and at one level, yes, I think, yes, you're right there. It's, you know, all the traditions end up merging in some way and going beyond it. But when it comes to looking, there's a value in looking at what each individual tradition has to offer as well, and how they approach it. And it's I suppose we go back to methodology and methods. You know, it's a method we use as much as anything else in how we approach the other. In the first instance, what goes on within the actual spiritual direction relationship is something that's going to go beyond traditions.
Thank you, Eibhlis.
But
thank you very much.
It's what works up to that is important as well.
Thank you. Caitlin, would you like to come in?
Oh, hi, Bernadette.
Hi.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I was very privileged to work in with addictions in Canada and also in a large inner city community hospital. So I'm just really heartwarmed, Eibhlis, by your, speaking to being evangelized by the people we serve. Because even though I would not have used that word, that was what the experience was on a daily basis.
That's right.
And when people would say to me, "Oh, you do such beautiful work," I always felt like, if only I could explain to you how filled my heart is by the beauty in these people and the gifts that they bring to me, because in their vulnerability, they're very transparent. And I always felt so blessed by the work, and I'm really heartened by this conversation this evening. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Caitlin. And there are lovely greetings coming in, Eibhlis, in the chat as well, if you're able to see them there. Thank you so much.
I'll save that chat, Eibhlis, and send it on to you in the next day or two.
Okay, thanks, Noel.
Liz Murray.
Eibhlis, first of all, I want to say congratulations, and it was an amazing piece of work. And what struck me listening to you was, having recently just come back from Santiago, that in Santiago I met, there is a ministry, the Faithful Companions of Jesus, and the sisters there are living out that. What struck me was the authenticity of your living your Vincentian mission, and that in Santiago that was the same. The sisters were accompanying people after their Camino, and as you said, it transcends traditions, but at the same time it goes deeply into each tradition. And that's what I hear from both of the guys talking about your book, that the depth that you went into your own tradition then becomes something that you've offered that transcends every tradition.
Yeah.
That the depth of the authenticity, you know, is kind of universal. And it was, yeah, it was beautiful listening to you and listening to what the other people had to say. And congratulations again.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you.
Okay, Fionnuala. Fionnuala Francis.
Hello, thank you. That was, I can't wait to read this book. It's
Aye.
been a good sell tonight.
Yeah.
Two things I wanted to, have you any thoughts about why the Vincentian tradition is so unknown? Because it's not new, is it? And the other one is, can you sum up for me, I don't know anything about it, in a sentence, what is the Vincentian tradition that is unique? What's its unique selling point?
Why it's unknown, I suppose Vincent himself would have been very reticent. He wouldn't have been somebody who would have been out there shouting at the roof, off the rooftops. He just got on with it. And very much that is how the overall Vincentian family have tended to be. We have got on with the work. And there hasn't been the same emphasis put on this type of thing in relation to it. A lot of our focus has been on service and evangelizing. We look at the mottos that were chosen for both the Vincentian priests and for the Daughters of Charity, specifically because they were the two that were founded in the 17th century. The Vincentians would have picked up from Luke 4, I'm sent to evangelize the poor. So it was evangelizers of the poor. Whereas, and the daughters, our logo is Charity of Christ urges us. And we're founded for service. So and it's a charity of Christ crucified that urges us. So it's that sense of, so you're moving forward in service and you're evangelizing. Having said that, every group Vincent started from 1617, when the confraternities of charity were started, they were sent out to do both corporal and spiritual service. It was never seen as an either or. From the point in Châtillon in August 1617 in Châtillon, when he met the corporal poverty of people, added to the spiritual poverty he had met earlier in the same year, he always spoke of both, and it was never one or the other, it's both. And the early sisters were sent out corporal and spiritual service. And there's a letter to the Vins: if you think you're only going out to save souls, you better have another thing coming, because you're to look after their needs as well. But equally, the sisters, when they were sent out, it was, you don't talk to somebody about God on an empty stomach, or when they're seriously ill. You look after their physical needs, the corporal needs first, and you talk to them about God. And he gave them a model for doing it in the way he handled the conferences. That's as I see it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Put up your head, Ronja.
Thank you very much, Eibhlis, for that. I'm sure you could add a lot more, but time must concepta.
I know. I just want to say I'm so glad I was here tonight. The whole subject matter, Eibhlis, it has kind of blown my mind. And I want to say thanks to yourself and Bernadette, yourself too, who supervised the doctorate, and all Inspire for the just wonderful work you're doing around all the different areas of spirituality. I just hadn't even, I suppose, thought of it until we were, your book and your launch came up. I said, spiritual care, spiritual direction, listen to Eddie and Paul also on those who are marginalized. And what he's saying to me is, we can say it's for everybody, but sometimes we are the privileged ones who are taken care of in spirituality and all that. So I just want to say thanks to each and every one of you, and well done.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay. Anybody else like to?
Heard that Karen wants to come in there.
Karen, I don't see.
from the Carol.
Hi, Carol, you're welcome.
You may speak. Yes, actually, Bernadette, my name is Bernadette McNaughton, and I was sitting beside Bernadette Carroll. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Eibhlis. I found it very enjoyable, what she had to say, very reflective, and obviously it was something very easy to bring back to my own situation. And it's just a question, or an often I thought about, that she herself and others said, the basis of all accompaniment really is friendship and trust, empathy and respect. And working with people in poverty, people who are struggling, that is the basis, I think. And sometimes that relationship of building up, bringing up trust, bringing up a sense of care and empathy, and genuine feeling for the person, and a mutual relationship. But sometimes, because of what's gone on in Ireland, that is the level of the accompaniment. It may not ever become overtly or directly spiritual. So the notion that I think today, listening to you, the act of accompaniment for one of us can actually be a very spiritual experience. But how it can become a mutual one, it cannot be forced. It needs an initiative. So that question for me, that challenge, if you gave me tonight, I'll ask you to answer it now. But it really means the accompaniment, if most of us are engaged with, when that comes to a deep level of respect and empathy, then, and that itself, the nature of that action is spiritual. But whether it comes directly or overtly spiritual accompaniment, that's just a question.
Thank you so much, Brenda. And I know that's born from years and years.
Oh, sorry.
You're muted, Bernie.
Sorry, Bernadette, I did that by
Thank
mistake.
you very much, Bernadette. Sorry. Yeah, thank you very much for that, Bernadette, because I know from all your years of a very public social justice advocacy work, that when you speak about friendship, trust, respect, empathy, that these are all practices that you've distilled from experience over years and years of spiritual accompaniment and care in settings of marginalisation. So we really appreciate that, offering us a language to look at this area of spiritual care, friendship, trust, respect and empathy. Thank you so much.
Yes, yeah, good to see you there, Bernadette. Yeah. Could I just mention that I just yesterday I wrote an endorsement for a book by Emilia Francisca Diane Widowati, who was one of our MA graduates. She studied in All Hallows and did the MA in spirituality there at that time. And she's from Indonesia. And she brought out her book based on her MA dissertation at the time in English, but now they're bringing out an Indonesian version. Now she is of the congregation of the Sisters of Charity, Daughters of Maire and Joseph. And so I had the occasion to read her book. And she's obviously in the Vincentian tradition. They're their congregation, and they're out in Indonesia and in the Netherlands and other parts of the world. So again, it was just an example to me really of how in another part of the world, like Indonesia, the great Vincentian tradition of spirituality is so evident and so much doing such good. So we really have to get all this out there more. And her book too now is going to help to do that as well from that part of the world.
Do you have the name of her book, Michael?
Yeah, Put Out into the Deep is the English title. A rereading of the spirituality of the congregation of the Sisters of Charity, Daughters of Maire and Joseph. But it's going to come out now as well in the Indonesian text, because that's where she's from.
Thank you. So there's maybe more happening than we realized at the start of the evening.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Maybe one more comment and I'll hand back to Michael then.
Thomas McCormack, go ahead.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, Thomas. Yeah, thank you, Thomas. We'll do the last comment of the evening.
No problem. I just like to say congratulations to Eibhlis. We had the pleasure of I was on the MA program this year, so we had the pleasure of having Eibhlis lecturers this year. and her passion for the Vincentian tradition and the way she talked about Louise and Vincent and really nourished us and things that like so much the class didn't know about. And there was a sentence in particular that really struck me that I think came from Eibhlis's research, and it was about, I'm sure Eibhlis will be able to correct me, but it was around being unseen and heard, unseen and unheard.
Unheard in full view.
Yeah, and it was like getting a slap across the face, because in my own sense, I was like, well, isn't there a part of us all that's unseen and unheard, even though we're all in full view? Mm-hmm. And I was like, Jesus, there isn't a human in the world who can't relate to that sentence if you sat and kind of, so yeah, so just thanks to Eibhlis and all the people at Spire. Yeah, and best of luck, Eibhlis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's lovely to comment now from the and for Eibhlis at the end of a year of teaching. So Michael, I hand back to you.
Okay, thanks, Bernadette. Yeah, well, it's been great. It's great to see so many of us here this evening who have been with each other, maybe at different times and different places over recent years, to being able to gather here this evening together and bring us together like this, which Eibhlis and her book has done, is wonderful. And also it's brought Paul in from the United States and from the Society, International Society for the Study of Christian Spirituality. And great to see Eddie there too, giving us his contribution from his work too with the Ignatian Spirituality Project. And all the contributions we've heard. And I'm very happy to see Bernadette McMahon there this evening as well, because yeah, like Bernadette, I'm aware of her work over the years, and herself and Eibhlis did a course with me, Liberation, Theology and Spirituality, back in UCD in the 1980s. So we've been traveling together in different places in different ways over the years. And you know, what we have to do now, of course, is to keep this good work going. So it's been great to gather like this and to learn from each other and to share and be consoled and uplifted by each other and all that. But we want to keep this great work of spirituality studies and spirituality studies in different traditions, and the plight of the people who are marginalized and the different kinds of marginalization that do exist in our world. We want to try and continue to be able to respond to all those situations and to keep the faith and spirituality strong in ourselves that can give us the energy to keep going doing this, because of course, you know, we know ourselves too that keeping it up and keeping it going can be demanding, and we need energy and we need resources and we need each other to do all that, and our faith and our spirituality as well. And a very big thank you to the Vincentian family for all that they are doing and have done over the years, and will continue to do, I know, into the future. And thank you for the gift that you yourselves are. And some of us here have had the privilege of being part of that during, say, our years in Eibhlis College or wherever it was, and where we too are grateful for what we received. And one of the people who the Eibhlis Trust is sponsoring in the coming year has been here this evening and has spoken. So that is great too. Thanks very much, everybody, and the very best to you all, and let's keep going. Okay. Cheers. Thank you very much, Eibhlis. God bless.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks
Michael.
Have a relaxed evening or afternoon. Thanks.
A big thank you to Noel Keating, who hosted us on his account this evening. Thank you, Noel. You hosted us. A very big thanks to Noel. That made a lot possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.